I'm a trail runner who had run this trail 60 times, and never in my life had my GoPro captured something so terrifying. I've watched the footage 100 times and still can't fully accept that Bigfoot ran after me. Nothing could have prepared me for what happens at the end. It was early September, a Tuesday morning, Mount Hood National Forest in Oregon. I knew the terrain of this trail well enough to run it without looking at my feet most of the time. I had the GoPro chest mounted because I was putting together footage for a video. Nothing dramatic, just a run edit. I parked at the trailhead a little after 6 in the morning, did a short warm-up, and headed out alone. 1 mile in, something crossed the trail ahead of me. It crossed at a full sprint, not bounding, not loping, but running with the kind of speed that takes up space in your field of vision and then is gone before you can form a complete thought about what you just saw. Upright, dark, enormous. It crossed maybe 30 yards ahead of me, from left to right, hit the tree line on the far side of the trail, and vanished into the undergrowth without slowing. The whole thing took less than 2 seconds. I stopped running. The forest went completely silent. What had just entered the woods that made everything else stop? Not gradually quiet the way a forest gets when something disturbs it and the birds settle down after a few minutes. Immediately silent, the kind of silence that has a before and an after, with nothing in between. No birds, no wind through the canopy, nothing moving in the brush on either side. I stood in that silence for what was probably 30 seconds and felt my heart rate drop from running pace down to something slower and more careful. Then I started running again. I had gone maybe 40 yards when I heard the first footfall behind me. It was bipedal. That was the first thing I registered. Not 4 impacts in sequence the way a bear or a deer moves, but 2, left, right, heavy and fast and spaced in a way that suggested a very long stride. The trail behind me had a slight uphill grade in that section, and I could hear the footfalls working against it without any apparent effort, each one hitting the packed dirt with a concussive weight that I could feel in my chest more than hear with my ears. I looked back. The GoPro caught it, a Bigfoot at full sprint, roughly 40 yards back, coming down the center of the trail. Dark brown fur, 9 feet tall at minimum, arms pumping in full running form the way a trained sprinter uses their arms, not swinging loosely the way you might expect. The stride was enormous. I tried to estimate it later using landmarks in the footage and came up with something close to 8 feet per step. Each footfall hit the trail hard enough that the audio track on the GoPro has a rhythmic thumping underneath everything else in that section of the recording. If something that big could move that fast, what chance did a trail runner actually have? I stopped looking back and ran as hard as I could. Trail running and survival running are not the same thing. Trail running involves pacing, reading terrain, conserving energy for climbs, managing your breathing around effort. It is a controlled thing. You are always making small decisions. When to push, when to ease off, where to put your foot on a technical section. Survival running is none of that. It is just output. Every system maxed out immediately, form degrading in the first 30 seconds. Nothing held in reserve. No ceiling on what you are willing to spend. I went to full output in about 4 strides and held it. My breathing went ragged fast and stayed that way. The trail ahead was slightly downhill for the next 200 yards, and I let gravity contribute to whatever my legs were doing and kept my eyes forward. The gap closed anyway. I could hear it without looking, the footfalls getting louder, the spacing between them making it clear that whatever pace I had found, the Bigfoot was running faster. I looked back again at what felt like 30 yards, but was probably less, and saw it still in full stride, not appearing to breathe hard, not appearing to have any particular urgency about it, just running with a kind of mechanical efficiency that had no ceiling I could identify. Long arms, wide shoulders, head held forward, eyes straight ahead on the trail. Eyes on me. Was I watching something that already knew how this chase was going to end? The downhill section came and I opened a small gap, maybe 5 yards, and held it for roughly 20 seconds. Then the terrain flattened and the gap disappeared in a matter of strides. The Bigfoot ran the downhill like it was flat ground. No adjustment in its body, no shift in its form, just the same efficient stride eating up the same amount of trail per second, regardless of the angle. I was screaming, I found out later when I reviewed the audio. Not words, just sound, the involuntary noise that comes out of a person when their body has understood something that their brain is still catching up to. I did not know I was doing it at the time. The gap was down to 25 yards and still closing when the trail narrowed. The single track through that section of Mount Hood runs tight, maybe 3 feet wide, with the tree canopy dropping low on both sides where the younger growth crowds in against the established trail corridor. The light went from gray and open to darker and more compressed, and the change in the sound was immediate. The Bigfoot's footfalls got louder in the enclosed space, more directional, easier to track. 20 yards back, still closing. I hit a hard switchback, a sharp left-hand turn that dropped me briefly out of the direct line, and gained maybe 3 seconds. I heard the Bigfoot hit the turn behind me, and I looked back expecting it to slow, expecting the angle to cost it something. Was this the first mistake it would make in the chase? It left the trail entirely. It went straight through the brush on the inside of the turn, crashed through the undergrowth, and came out on the far side of the switchback, already realigned with the trail. It lost almost nothing. The 3 seconds became 1 second, maybe less. I watched it happen over my shoulder with the GoPro capturing the whole thing, and what hit me was not just the speed but the decision-making. It had looked at the switchback, done the geometry of it, and chosen the shorter path. That is not an animal reacting. That is a calculation. Mid-turn, I got its face on camera for the first time, not from 40 yards, but from close enough that the GoPro resolved the details clearly. Wide face, flat across the features, with a heavy jaw and a prominent brow ridge. The eyes were forward-facing and dark and locked straight ahead. Not on the trail, on me. The expression, if I had to describe it, was not rage and not excitement. It was focus. The expression of something that was very good at this particular thing and was fully engaged in doing it. If that focus never broke, how long before it finally caught me? Then it vocalized. A sharp, explosive bark, not the drawn-out howl that people describe in most Sasquatch accounts, but a single, percussive sound, short and directional, the kind of sound that you feel in your sternum before your ears fully register it. Not a warning, not a territorial display. Something purposeful. I flinched physically when it happened and nearly lost my footing on the turn, my stride breaking apart for a half-second, before I found it again and kept moving. Then something answered it from the left flank. A different call, slightly lower in pitch, from a position maybe 50 yards into the trees to my left and ahead of my current position. Not behind me. Ahead and to the left. Already repositioned, already waiting. I hadn't heard it move. I hadn't heard anything move. Whatever was on my left flank had gotten there without making a sound, which meant it had been moving while the one behind me had been making noise, while I had been focused on the one behind me. The two calls overlapped for a moment, the one behind me and the one to my left, and the pattern of them, the back and forth of it, was not random noise. It was not the ambient sound of a forest reacting to a disturbance. It was the same structured exchange as any two people calling to each other across a distance to establish position, to confirm that the other was in place, to signal that the setup was ready. Had I already been running into an ambush without realizing it? Had every step I'd taken since this started been a step they had already planned for me? The Bigfoot behind me was not just chasing me, it was driving me. There is a difference between those two things. A chase is reactive, it follows you wherever you go. What was happening here was directional. The one behind me had been pushing me left from the moment it stepped onto the trail, and the one on the left flank had been positioned ahead of me to the left to receive whatever the one behind me delivered. I had been running a line someone else had drawn. I understood it in the same instant that I understood I had been going left, following the trail left around the switchback, away from the call on the left flank, which meant I had been going exactly where the one behind me was pushing me to go. I cut hard right off the trail and into the open forest on the right side, angling away from both vocalizations, trying to break the geometry of whatever was being set up around me. The Sasquatch behind me adjusted without missing a beat. Had it expected that move all along? I heard it leave the trail and come into the open forest after me, crashing through the undergrowth with no apparent concern about the noise it was making. The one on the left flank went quiet. I could not hear it anymore, which was not reassuring. It did not mean it had stopped. It meant it had stopped making sound. The rocky section comes about 1.5 miles into that trail system, a stretch where the path crosses a ridge of exposed basalt and the footing gets technical. Irregular surfaces, loose stones at the edges, roots breaking through between the rock faces. Under normal conditions, I slowed down through that section and picked my steps. Under these conditions, I did not slow down and I did not pick my steps. And about 30 yards into the rock section, a root caught my lead foot and I went down hard. I slid on the basalt for several feet, tore the knee of my running tights, felt the skin go on my right palm, and came to a stop against a larger rock at the trail's edge. The GoPro stayed mounted, the chest harness held, and the footage from those seconds is some of the clearest in the entire recording because the camera was briefly stationary, pointing back up the trail. The Bigfoot was 15 yards away. How much distance is 15 yards when something that large is already moving at full speed? It had closed from 25 yards to 15 in the 3 seconds it took me to fall and stop. 15 yards is 45 feet. I know what 45 feet looks like on a trail, and I know what it looks like on that specific piece of footage, and it is close enough that the GoPro resolved the fur texture on its chest and shoulders, the individual fingers of its right hand as the arms swung in its stride, and the visible cloud of breath in the cold morning air coming from its nose and mouth as it ran. It stopped when I stopped. Not immediately, it took a step or two to decelerate, but it stopped and stood there at 15 yards while I scrambled back to my feet and got my legs under me. My right knee had taken the impact and was sending a hot, sharp signal up my leg with every movement, not a signal I could ignore. The kind of signal that tells you something structural has been compromised, and the next 40 minutes are going to be a different experience than the previous 40. If it could see that I was injured, what did that change about the way this was going to end? I started running again on the damaged knee, and the Bigfoot started running again behind me. And then it slowed down, not to a stop, not to a walk. It slowed to exactly the pace I was now capable of running, and it held that pace, and it maintained the same gap. 15 yards, not closing, not falling back, matching me. I looked back twice in the next 30 seconds, and both times it was there. Same distance, same steady stride, watching me move with the same forward-locked focus it had shown since the beginning. This was worse than the sprint. The sprint had been terrifying, but it had been simple. Something fast coming at you requires a simple response, which is to run. This was not simple. This was the Bigfoot demonstrating that it knew I was hurt, that it understood what hurt meant in terms of what I could do next, and that it had made a decision to wait rather than close. It was patient in a way that felt deliberate and measured. It was waiting me out. If it was waiting instead of attacking, what exactly was it waiting for? The trail opened up about a 1/4 mile past the rock section, a stretch of maybe 50 yards where the trees pulled back on both sides and the sightline extended. The morning light was fuller in the open section, and after the compressed darkness of the narrow trail, the brightness registered as a physical relief, the way light always does when you have been in the dark long enough. The second Bigfoot was standing in the trail ahead of me. It had stepped out of the tree line on the left side of the trail and stopped, facing me, arms at its sides, completely still, not approaching, just there, in the center of the trail, blocking the forward line. I skidded to a stop on the open trail, and the one behind me stopped simultaneously, still at 15 yards, as if we had all agreed to pause. Was this the moment the chase officially turned into something else? I was standing between two Bigfoot on an open trail with a damaged knee and no cover within reach. The open section of trail that had looked like relief 30 seconds ago, the brightness of it, the space, had turned into a problem. There was nowhere on that 50-yard stretch where I could not be clearly seen from both directions, and both directions currently had a Bigfoot in them. The second one was slightly shorter than the first, maybe 8.5 feet, but broader across the chest and shoulders, with fur that ran more auburn than dark brown, a reddish-brown tone that caught the open light differently than the first one had in the shadows of the tree canopy. It stood with the same quality of stillness the first one had shown when it stopped, not frozen, not tense, just still in the way that something is still when it has no reason to move yet. Its eyes were forward-facing and dark, the same as the first. It was looking at me the same way the first one had looked at me. Neither of them moved. Neither of them made a sound. The only audio on the GoPro in that section is my breathing. Fast, shallow. The breathing of someone whose body is trying to process more than it has the capacity to process at one time. I went right. There was no calculation in it. The trail was blocked ahead, and there was a Bigfoot behind me, and the only open direction was right, where the ground dropped away from the trail edge into a shallow creek drainage. A rocky channel with maybe 6 inches of water running through it, the kind of seasonal drainage that floods in winter and runs low in September. I went over the trail edge and down the bank and hit the creek at a run, and my trail shoes went onto wet rock immediately, and I nearly went down again before I found the footing. Would the water and rock slow them down the way it slowed me? The creek bed was rough going, uneven basalt covered in a thin layer of algae. The water cold enough that I could feel it through my shoes on contact, the banks on both sides dropping away steeply enough that climbing out would cost time, and the knee did not want to do the lateral movement required. I stayed in the water and ran. The Bigfoot behind me followed into the creek. I heard it hit the bank and come down, and then I heard each footfall in the water behind me. A deep concussive splash every time one of those feet came down in the drainage, the sound of it reverberating off the rock walls of the channel. I looked back, and the GoPro got a full rear shot of it, mid-stride in the water, both arms out slightly for balance, the creek exploding off each footfall in a white spray that caught the early light. It moved across the wet rock with total ease. Where my trail shoes were slipping and forcing me to shorten my stride and drop my pace, it moved as if the surface were no different from the packed dirt of the trail. No adjustment, no slipping, no reduction in pace. If the terrain slowed me, but not it, how long before the distance disappeared again? My knee was getting worse with every stride on the uneven rock. The altitude was working against me. That section of trail sits above 3,000 feet, and the thinner air at elevation is something you adapt to over time, but never fully account for when your body is already under maximum stress. I was deteriorating faster than my fear could compensate for. I checked the GoPro battery out loud. I heard myself do it on the audio later, 34%, and kept moving. The drainage curved left after about 100 yards and then opened onto a wider section where the banks dropped to almost nothing, just a low step up onto flat ground covered in fern and moss. I pulled myself up out of the creek and looked back. The Bigfoot had stopped at the bank. Why would something that had followed me this far suddenly refuse to climb out after me? It was standing at the edge of the drainage, in the water, watching me climb out onto the flat ground. It did not follow me up the bank. It stood there and watched me go. And I stood there for a moment, watching it watch me, both of us breathing hard. Me audibly, it in those visible cold air clouds from its nose and mouth. And then I turned and ran into the open forest. The second Bigfoot was gone. No sound from the left flank, no movement in the trees ahead. I ran through the open forest section without a trail to follow, picking the line through the trees that looked most open, angling in the direction I knew the fire road to be from memory of the trail map. The knee was talking to me on every stride. My water bottle was mostly empty. The GoPro battery was at 34%. Could I reach the fire road before either of them cut me off again? No sound from the left flank the whole way. The second Bigfoot had gone quiet after I came up out of the creek and stayed quiet. The original one, the dark brown one, the first, I could no longer hear behind me either. No footfalls on the forest floor, no breathing, no movement in the undergrowth. Either they had stopped following me or they had gotten better at doing it quietly, and I had no way to know which. The forest was silent all the way to the convergence. I came back onto the trail proper through a gap in the undergrowth about 200 yards from where I had gone off it. The fire road was visible through the trees ahead. The line of it, the different quality of light that open ground has compared to closed canopy, maybe 200 yards away, possibly a little less. Close enough that I could see it clearly and hold that image in my head as something concrete. Out of nowhere, both Bigfoot emerged from the trees behind me at the same time. Had they been shadowing me the entire time without making a sound? They came out onto the trail simultaneously from opposite sides, the first one from the right, the second from the left, and they were 50 yards back when they appeared. They were not running. They were walking side by side on the trail at a steady, unhurried pace, and the shift from what the chase had been to what this was hit me harder than most of what had come before it. A chase is comprehensible. Something chasing you is operating on a logic you can understand, even if you cannot outrun it. This was different. They were not chasing anymore. They were behind me, and they were walking, and the word that kept coming back to me as I watched them over my shoulder was escort. They were walking me out, 100 yards to the fire road. I did not slow down. The knee was screaming, and my lungs were at their limit, but I did not slow down. And the two Bigfoot behind me kept the same 50-yard distance without any apparent effort, walking at a pace that covered ground faster than their relaxed gait suggested. I filmed them over my shoulder for most of that final 100 yards. The footage is steady enough to see both of them clearly, side by side, the difference in their coloring visible in the open light, moving together with the same forward stillness they had shown every time they stopped. If they could close the gap whenever they wanted, why were they making sure it stayed exactly 50 yards? I hit the fire road at a dead run and crossed it. On the far side, the trail continued down toward the parking lot, and I went down it another 40 or 50 yards before I finally slowed and stopped and turned around. My legs had made the decision before my brain did. They simply stopped taking strides. The Bigfoot had stopped at the fire road. Was the road the boundary they had been pushing me toward the entire time? Both of them were standing at the tree line on the far side of the road, in the shadow where the trail met the forest edge. Still, silent, watching me across the open width of the fire road, the way they had been watching me for the past mile and a half, with that same forward, locked attention that I had not been able to read as anger or excitement or anything else I had a name for. I raised the GoPro and pointed it at them and held it there and filmed them standing at the tree line. Then the first Bigfoot, the original one, the dark brown one, the one that had crossed the trail in front of me a mile in and started all of this, turned away from me and walked to the largest tree on the road's edge. A Douglas fir, 4 feet across at the base, maybe more. An old tree, the kind of tree that has been there long enough to anchor itself deep into the basalt and hardpan below the soil. The kind of tree that does not move when the wind comes through hard in November because its root system has 30 or 40 years of grip on the ground around it. What could it possibly intend to do with a tree that size? The Bigfoot gripped the trunk with both hands. The fingers wrapped around the near side of the bark and the arms pulled, and for 1 second, nothing happened. 1 second of what looked like resistance, the tree holding, and then the sound started. A deep crack from somewhere below the ground, then a groan that ran up through the trunk and out through the canopy, and then a tearing sound that was enormous and low and continuous as the root system came up out of the earth on the far side of the trunk, the soil breaking open around the base of the tree in a rough circle, the root ball lifting like the edge of a lid being pried off. The GoPro audio clipped on the loudest part of it. The recording distorts and comes back. And then the tree was tilting, slowly at first, and then not slowly at all, the full height of it swinging in a long arc across the fire road and hitting the ground on the far side with an impact that came up through my feet. If it could uproot something that massive without hesitation, what exactly was it trying to communicate to me? The dust settled. The echo of it moved through the trees in both directions. The Bigfoot stood over the fallen trunk with both hands still resting on the bark. A Douglas fir of that size, 4 feet at the base, carries somewhere between 40 and 60,000 pounds of weight. I looked that up later. I spent some time with that number. It turned its head and looked directly at me. Not at the tree, not at the road, not at the second Bigfoot standing 10 feet away, at me. Across the width of the fire road, over the trunk of the tree now lying across it, through the dust still settling in the morning air. It held that for 5 full seconds. I counted them because the GoPro was recording, and I wanted the footage to have a number attached to it. Was it making sure I understood that the display had been meant specifically for me? Then both Bigfoot turned and walked into the forest, and were gone. The trees closed behind them. No sound, no vocalization, No crashing through undergrowth. Just gone, the way the first one had been when it crossed the trail in front of me at the start of this, before I understood what kind of morning it was going to be. If they could disappear that easily, how often had they been watching runners on that trail without anyone realizing it? The tree was still across the fire road when I drove past it on the way out. I did not stop. I did not get out of the car and stand next to it and take a picture. I drove past it and kept driving and did not stop until I was back on the highway.